emotional eating isn't inherently a bad thing. It's also not inherently a good thing. It's just like everything that I talk about with nutrition, it requires context. Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel. This is Kat. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I sometimes upload videos, and today I wanted to talk about emotional eating. Emotional eating is something that comes up a lot, and in the time that we're in the world right now, emotional eating is something that a lot of people are having experience with. And I wanted to preface this by saying that emotional eating isn't inherently a bad thing. It's also not inherently a good thing. It's just like everything that I talk about with nutrition, it requires context. And there is nothing really in science that's going to be completely one way or the other. It requires context. And so how I approach nutrition is very much along those same lines. And there are times when emotional eating can be helpful. It's not going to be something that's going to harm, but in other cases it can get to a place where it's kind of harmful. I actually, if you don't know, I co-host a podcast. It's called Iron Movement, and it's one word. The movement is without the vowels. We talked about emotional eating. I was really excited about that episode. It was something that I was really proud of. So if you want more information about that, that'll be linked down below. I will pull some of the major information from there, but if you want more information, listen to that podcast episode. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. What are you doing? Okay, so I don't know if you have this experience too, but since all of this craziness started happening in the world, on my Facebook feed and my Instagram feed, I feel like there is a push to just like rise above. There's this line of thinking where it says like you have to come out of this, or you should come out of this with a new side hustle, or write a book, or like do something productive with this time. I love productivity, but those messages that I'm seeing, I truly believe that they can be harmful. So they aren't encouraging you to really feel your feelings. And maybe like now, there's different stages of grieving, right? So now some people might be in that mindset where they're just kind of going through it and now being a little bit more productive than they were maybe at the beginning of everything being shut down. But there was that messaging at the beginning of essentially like pushing down your emotion, shoving the door on it, like just not feeling your feelings and just like working through it, pushing through, rising above without really giving yourself that time to really feel those emotions and to kind of dissect those and look inward. And I'm just kind of thinking through this. So if you see me like looking around, I'll try to like stay looking forward. But that messaging is something that can be toxic, especially when we're talking about it related to health. And I see this throughout normal time, like all time. What I see it encouraging, or how I see it play out, is that people will try to shove down their emotion, and that emotion, it doesn't go away. It doesn't, like, just because you don't want to deal with it doesn't mean that it's gonna like come out later in a less helpful way. Just like when we are in a relationship, if we're like bottling everything, it's gonna blow up. So the whole point of that is to say that functions do serve a purpose. There is a reason why we have feelings. It's something that is in all humans, in our species, and even animals. We all have the capacity to feel. We all have emotions. If you think of a famous historical character, famous historical person from like forever ago, you have felt those same feelings that they have felt previously. You are going to have feelings, and they serve a purpose. If you think about our senses, so hearing, smelling, touch, vision, taste, my favorite, those give you kind of this vision of the external world, whereas your feelings give you this vision of your internal world. They are important to work through, and they're important to listen to. You don't have to shove those down. And in my belief, you should not shove those down. Now, I'll also say that I am not a mental health professional. I am a health professional, being a registered dietitian, but not a mental health professional. With that being said, though, there are a lot of ties in with emotional health and emotions in general that tie directly into being a nutrition health professional. This is also a great reminder that health is not just about what you eat, what you put in your body. There are it's called the social determinants of health. And basically, without going off on another tangent, there's just so many things that impact your health. And sometimes I think the health and fitness industry can get so hyper-focused on just your nutrition and your movement and like stress management, when health is truly so much more, and there's a lot that is outside of our immediate control. So anyway, the more that we're able to look inward and we're able to identify what our emotions are currently, the easier it'll be to be more in touch with your emotions, and the easier that aligning your nutrition, or at least being aware of how your nutrition kind of plays out when you're in a heightened emotional state, the easier that will be. So I also wanted to hit on normal eaters. Now, Ellen Satter, she has done amazing work in the field of eating disorders and even like child nutrition. She has this amazing kind of blog post. She made it back in the 80s, but it's called What is a Normal Eater? If you haven't read that, you haven't heard of that or seen that, I really encourage you to look that up. But when you're talking about emotional eating, and in the context, normal eaters are just people who eat, they enjoy their food, they don't have this like intense focus on it, they're not worried about their food as far as like how it's gonna impact their body. At the same time, they're also not using food in a harmful way. If you think of people who can eat whatever they want, and you see them enjoy their food, and other times you see them not have that specific food, and you might ask them like, why aren't you having that? And they'll say like, I just don't feel like it. And you're like, there's this cake in front, how can you not feel like it? So someone kind of like that, someone who is just not really that driven by food, and they use it to fuel their body, but that doesn't mean that they don't also enjoy their food. It's just someone with a healthy relationship with food. People who have that healthy relationship with food, they sometimes might turn to food when they have these kind of heightened emotional states, but they're not going to see that food as a way to solve their problems. At the same time, they're also going to be at least minimally aware of how their body is feeling as far as their fullness goes, rather than eating and going past that fullness. And when they do stop that eating, when they end that kind of more heightened emotional eating, they're not going to beat themselves up, they're not going to feel shame or guilt or promise themselves to be better or be good the next day. They're just gonna see it as something that happened and something that doesn't impact who they are as a person. And they're not going to see it as something that is a reflection on their dedication or discipline or anything like that. It's just going to be something that happened. And they're not going to use that as a way to start that binge. And they just trust that their appetite will return back to normal. And so that's a place that we want to be. That is a place that I have helped people get to, rather than having those heightened emotional states filled with eating and then feeling really crappy about themselves. So a lot of this information is coming out of a book, and it's a Food and Feelings Workbook. It's a really good book. I'll also link that down below. And this is also just from other resources throughout the years. But in this specific book, they talk about how there are 7 major emotions that are most commonly associated with emotional eating in their studies. And so those are guilt, shame, hopelessness, anxiety, disappointment, confusion, and loneliness. And so I'm going to hit on those 7 really briefly. Okay, so distinguishing the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is that perception that you've done something that is like wrong in and of itself, versus shame being that feeling that you yourself are the problem. So that guilt is that you have made a mistake or you failed, versus that shame being that you are the mistake and that you are the failure. So they're a little bit different, but kind of similar. So with guilt, this might be when you were growing up, if your parent like made you feel bad for not eating all your food off your plate, and so you feel guilty for having any kind of food left over. Or maybe you felt guilty kind of in the opposite, to where you had a heightened appetite on a regular basis or that day, and maybe there wasn't enough food prepared or available, and so you were asking for more food, or maybe you weren't satisfied with that meal and you wanted a little bit something sweet after, and then were made to feel guilty about it. And so it can go in many different ways, many different reasons why, but that guilt is something that people feel if they either don't eat all of the food off their plate, or if they want more and they feel guilty that they want more. And the problem comes because when you repeatedly deny your authentic feelings, you start to erode some of that self-trust and that self-confidence in what you really want. And that's hard when we're talking about nutrition, because nutrition is so much more than just fuel. There are so many different parts of it where you can think about like really what you want to eat, what food combination do you want, what flavor profile, and how much food do you want? Like, how are your hunger cues? Are you extra hungry? Are you just, minimally hungry? What's going on? And so when you are repeatedly denying yourself throughout your formative years, and it just becomes a habit later, it's totally understandable for someone to feel guilty because of that self-confidence and that self-trust to be kind of eroded. So that's guilt. Shame, on the other side, as we mentioned before, it's really that feeling that you didn't make that mistake, that you are that mistake and you are that failure. This comes a lot of times, I see this in some people who have or they want really strict diets, and they really want to follow it, or they're put a lot of effort into following it and not making any mistakes, because to them making a mistake makes them a failure rather than that action just having failed. And it gives them a sense of this false pride if they're able to get their nutrition 100% on point. While maybe their nutrition might be healthy, that's really not healthy mentally, and that's not healthy long term with their nutrition. And so I encourage people to not have this strict, perfect diet plan, just because that's not real life. That's not going to be something that's going to teach you how to approach nutrition in the long term, which I am all about long-term health, long-term focused nutrition, not this kind of quick fix kind of thing. So this is also really tied in with secretive eating. So if somebody is eating, maybe they eat in person, their normal kind of meal, but then in secret they might get in some ice cream or candy or cereal or soda, whatever. They do that in secret, and shame thrives in secrecy. If you are secretly eating something, it's likely that there's some shame there. And so what we can do is kind of bring that out into the light. Secrecy thrives in that darkness and that shame. And once we bring it into light, if we can bring some light to there, even if it is still in secret, looking at that as a neutral action, that's the important part. And that's the part that will begin to build up that self-confidence and that self-trust. And it won't take away all of the shame, but it'll begin to build those more healthier ties with the eating. And that is one of the reasons why we also had a podcast episode a few episodes back about food neutrality, and why I don't put any labels on food as far as good food or bad food. all food to me is neutral, and the context determines if that it is a more positive food or more of a negative based on that context. And you might be surprised that for me, spinach or kale or something, sometimes that has more of a negative in the context of that situation. And so now thinking of this, I might do a video on that, specifically on food neutrality. But one of the reasons why I promote that food neutrality is to reduce that shame that is often tied to emotional eating. Loki, what are you doing? Okay, so we are on to helplessness. Now there's a lot of helplessness feelings going around right now. What we can do for the majority of people, what we can do to help is really like stay inside, and if we go out, to wear a mask, which doesn't really feel like you're helping, even though it is a huge help. With helplessness and how it's tied to emotional eating, a lot of times if you feel helpless, then taking control of your nutrition and having that really strict plan can be a way for you to feel like you're helping yourself. Like that self-discipline is a way of getting you into the driver's seat when you feel like completely helpless. And that is something that can help a lot of people. And it doesn't mean that you have to let your nutrition completely go in a way that's not at all regulated or anything, but it's just making sure that if you want to do the strict plan, it's not because you feel helpless and you're not letting yourself feel that helplessness. You just kind of feel that and you try to shove that down and go to a strict plan that's not really helpful. And on the flip side, somebody who is feeling helpless, they can also kind of go on the opposite and be like, well, I can't help anything, so just forget it. I'm gonna eat whatever. And again, that you have permission, of course, to eat whatever you want, but it's really looking at, is it harming you or is it helping you? Is it helping you short term and harming you long term? And what that looks like. And are you doing that and pushing down your emotion? Okay, so anxiety is the next one. And there are a lot of anxious feelings going on right now, myself included, and carbohydrates especially, and overall balanced healthy meal, those are gonna help you to feel really good, right? They have biochemical properties that help our bodies to feel good. The concern that I have with that is just, are you using that food in an unconscious way or in a conscious way? Again, you have permission, of course, to eat whatever and whenever you want. But if you are trying to be a little bit more intentional with your eating, then when you are noticing that you have kind of anxious feelings coming on, making sure that if you do find yourself going into the kitchen, that you are fully present with whatever you choose. Maybe you choose ice cream, that's great. Maybe you're choosing a balanced meal. Maybe you're choosing some candy, a Twix bar, whatever. Just be present, enjoy that food, be mindful, try to use your senses and ground yourself with those senses and try to do it consciously. And also realize that there are some behaviors that can be a little destructive that are done to kind of reduce that anxiety, but then the more that those actions are done, the more the anxiety goes up, and then so you do more of those actions, and it's just this kind of cycle. And so some examples might be body checking, like looking in a mirror to make sure your body hasn't changed, or like stepping on a scale really consistently. Just things that give you anxiety, but also doing those actions reduces anxiety. But once you're done, your anxiety is further increased. Or like eating when you are not hungry, just eating because food is there to get rid of it. So just these behaviors that we try to do to reduce anxiety, but actually end up increasing that anxiety. All right, so now talking about disappointment. Food can be an amazing friend. It can seem like it's an amazing friend because it never talks back to you. It never shuts down your feelings. It doesn't say that it's too busy to hang out. And so if we are feeling kind of disappointed about something, having food as that immediate friend can seem like a really good thing to do. But a lot of times that ends up in a very unconscious point where we're eating and feeling bad about overconsume. It usually leads to that mindless eating beyond how much you really wanted to eat. So again, bringing back your senses into play. What can you gain from that food in a positive way, like with using all of your senses? How can you use some of that internal looking to see where your hunger cues are, where your fullness cues are, and overall just being very mindful. So the next one is confusion. When you're confused about everything that's going on, you don't really know what's gonna happen, turning to food and your weight seems like a really good distraction. Again, if you are not acknowledging your feelings, if you're just pushing them down, that's not what we want. It's not going to promote that very intentional, mindful approach of eating. And then the last one is loneliness. So there's a lot of loneliness going around. If you don't live with anybody, then you're having that like physical loneliness or the physical isolation, but also even if you're around people, you can still feel lonely. And even if you're like talking to your friends, but if you aren't able to really get your feelings out or feel like you're being understood. And again, food can be a really great like immediate filler for that, but not long term. So it's not going to help you to impact those feelings of loneliness in the long term. But again, that's one of the top reasons why emotional eating might come into play. And so maybe that means asking your friend to just kind of talk and telling them, explaining to them that you're feeling lonely, or talking to a family member or something. Again, if you are pushing down your emotions, shutting them down, then it'll come up in another way of just feeling sucky. It just reinforces that emotional connection to food, where you're trying to conquer that physical hunger when you really need to conquer that heart and connection hunger. Okay, so I wanted to leave you with 5 action steps to help you get more in touch with your emotions. Again, I will say, I was screaming off the top of a building. I'm not a licensed health professional. I am a registered dietitian. And so if you feel like these don't help, 100%, I encourage you to go see a therapist. They are great. I feel like everybody in the world can benefit from talking to a mental health professional. So 5 steps, I'm going to read them off from my notes that I have here, so I want to get these right. Okay, so be compassionate, be curious. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to like sob, wail, or punch a pillow, do that if it's not going to harm you or someone else. And trust that your body knows how to handle those feelings, and you can let them happen, you can let them go. Know that it's an emotional workout, and you probably feel pretty tired after you're done. And the more that you allow yourself to feel those feelings, the more your emotional muscles will grow and the easier that it will be. Number 2, ask yourself, do I feel hunger in my stomach or in my heart? Number 3, when you do want to emotionally eat, ask yourself, if there was no such thing as food in the world, what would I do then? If it's something that's not harmful to yourself or others and it allows you to kind of refocus your feelings, then go ahead and try that. The next one is to manage your sleep and your blood sugar levels. So making sure that you're getting enough sleep and making sure that you're getting in some quality nutrition to help you with balance energy levels, your hormone levels, balance blood glucose levels, or blood sugar levels. I keep saying I will have to make a video on that specifically, but making sure that you're taking care of yourself, that can impact a lot of your emotions too. Your sleep and your nutrition, it's so important for your overall health. And then the last one, what are 5 things that I'm going to do differently today to be in touch or to stay in touch with my feelings? And so these are just 5 action steps in the podcast linked down below. We actually list out 10 action steps, and then we also talk about principles or do's and don'ts for a healthy emotional life. And that includes being curious rather than judgmental about it, really approaching yourself with curiosity and not that judgment. So I hope this helped. I will have to get on making those other videos that I mentioned that I should make. If you liked this, please subscribe, comment, anything, share, and I will be back hopefully soon. All right, bye.